So, this is an unusual video I would make where I would talk about a topic or stuff like that related to bear. First time doing so bear with me. Get it? Bear? Anyways. So today I'll be talking about the concept and origin of Ito, and I'll break down this video into three parts. First part is the reference Ito is from, the book. Second part is its physical reference. Third part is its lore reference. So recently I picked up this book, which is amazing by the way, and I'll put it in the description if you want to buy it for yourself. I highly recommend it. Recommend it to you guys for its unique surreal horror that it provides. Anyway, so Ito is inspired by Uzumaki, or Spiraling Girl as it translates to, which is a horror-based manga written by Junji Ito, which is how Ito got its name. And Ito is pronounced Ito because of its Japanese pronunciation, not Ito. So Ito also means thread or yarn in Japanese, which is, or its translation to English, which is unironically interesting since it does bring up the idea of a spiral, as in realistic terms these objects can appear in a spiral shape. Now that we know Ito's origin, reference, and inspiration, I'm going to talk about the book. So to start off, Uzumaki is a story about a high schooler, Kiri Goshima, and her boyfriend Shuichi Saito, who live in a small town in Japan called Kuruzo-cho, which was cursed by supernatural and hypnotic spirals that drive citizens into fatal obsession and disturbing physical transformations. It starts off with the protagonist's boyfriend's father, who seemingly was the start of everything when he became dangerously fixated on spiral-like objects like shells and whirlpools. I won't get into too much into the book since I do not wish to spoil it for you guys, but basically the spiral consumes the entire town of Kuruzo-cho. The spiral aspect of the book is a heavy influence on Ito as a character in bear off of. Now, enough with the book. I'll talk about its physical appearance and break it down. So Ito is actually a lot darker of a lore and reference that many people wouldn't think of. The reason why Ito is such a dark character is for its physical reference. Basically, the appearance of Ito is literally based off deaths that happen in the book. The book has no real tally of how many deaths there are, but I'll shorten it to the most critical ones. So aside from the genocidal count bodies, there are 8 critical turning points in terms of death, unless you're including another, which is maybe around 9. But anyways, these 8 to 9 deaths influence a lot of elements of Ito, which is highly creepy. Aside from that, let me go into more depth. So the first and foremost, the most crucial part of Ito is its disturbing twisted-like body, or backbreaking, I guess some could say. Its body, basically. As you can see in its both classic and deluxe forms. And yes, in this video I'll be talking about both forms of Ito, but I'll be mostly referencing the deluxe version. So the reason for Ito to be like that in the first is because of the first and essential death of the book, which was Kiri's boyfriend's father, Toshio Saito. He was the first and perhaps the cause of the whole conflict, where he was so addicted to spirals that he became one himself, literally. He literally compressed his whole body into a circular basket where his organs and bodies form a spiral, which is how Ito pretty much got its, influence of his walking animations. Next reference is his ears. As you can look at Ito's ears, they're pretty different, using deluxe as a model. His left ear seems to have something that his right ear doesn't. This is because of the sight. She saw Shuichi's mom develop a phobia of spirals, and later finds out that spirals exist in her own body, whereas she stabs herself in her own eardrums to escape the patterns and later decay, as to referencing Ito's decaying body. So that's basically why Ito has something in its ears and has a body that's literally rotting, is because of that reference. So the third reference, using Deluxe Ito as an example, they're more apparent in Deluxe Ito than they are in Classic Ito. But anyways, Deluxe Ito has, I don't know if you look, but it has its guts and organs hanging out between its legs. This is because in the third death, a lovesick boy who was mesmerized about Kiri, the protagonist, by the way. He was so in love for her that he was willing to do anything, which unfortunately involved the tragedy of being ran over by a car. He was crushed and jammed into a square-like shape on the front wheel of the car, which is to the guts hanging out on Ito. Likewise, the character Mitsuri, which is the name of the character, was known as quote-unquote the Jack-in-a-Box, where he surprised people and ended up becoming an actual one himself when the spring of the car, the spring inside the car that he was hit from, was left inside of him also elaborating on Ito's visible guts. This also explains the missing arm Ito has because he was literally crushed. So before doing further analysis, I didn't have an explanation for the spikes or drills that appeared out of Ito's back. Though I would assume it's because of the fourth death, in which involved Kiri's best friend Kyoko Sekuno, who later became obsessed with attention, where her hair became mesmerizing from growing so much in a spiral form. This was because of jealousy of Kiri gaining attention. Unfortunately, the continuity of her hair growing drained her lifespan to mere nothingness, which also contributes to why Ito may have spikes on his back, and along with its walking animations to be on the ground twisted as if it was drained of life. Now, the most obvious of the reference is Ito's eyes, which has a large spiral pattern inside it. This is because of the fifth death, where a very attractive girl, Azami Kurotani, developed a spiral on her forehead where her crescent moon-shaped scar was. The scar granted her the ability to eat any man that was attracted to her, and unfortunately causes the fatality of her eating herself. And Ito receives that on his eyes, which reference to this picture. Also, Ito's head is barely attached, as to she's the only character to actually have any head-related injuries or deaths, because she literally consumed herself from the head down. So that's probably why Ito's head is not exactly stable in terms of being attached to it. Now, a very hidden reference is the spike that Ito has, and the semi-debris that's slightly apparent on it. This is because of the seventh death, and the reason why I skipped the sixth death, because the sixth death is more related to the fifth death, so... Anyway, seventh death that occurred involving a stalking creep that was watching the protagonist Kiri in the story inside a row house. Mr. Wakabayashi was one of the peeps who would, the creeps who would chill on the walls of the row houses and watch her, which he then suddenly mutated into a jagged, spiky monster, which explains Ito's like spiky attributes. As you can see, some of it is sticking out of his body. And the most central death is the protagonist and her boyfriends themselves succumbing to the spiral, which sums up the entirety of this explanation. Extra explanations could be the snail people, which explains Ito's walking animations, and the row houses, which I will not explain further because of spoiler reasons. Now, to the third part of its lore reference. Now, this could be coincidental, but analyzing the lines between the player and Ito seems very close to the reference in Uzumaki. That Bear Wiki states that Ito is a highly mysterious character, but a very conservative character. Well, unfortunately, it may be deeper than that. So going in depth, here the wiki states that Ito seems to be calm. This was basically every character before the influence of the spiral in Uzumaki. Now that we know Anemoya is based off one of the levels of the backrooms, which we all know, but I think Karuzo-cho has an influence because Ito states how open Anemoya is and temporarily is safe, which is the exact same scenario as Karuzo-cho before, where it was a normal town before the curse and being no longer safe. Ito also advises that the player should move on quickly, which is a similar case when Shuchi advised his girlfriend Kiri that they should leave the town before things go bad, which unfortunately never happened. The Bear Wiki also states that the unsurety of who Ito is or any general info on it. This is exactly the same thing as the influence of the spiral in the book, where the origins of it is unknown on what it is or where it came from and what caused it. The wiki also states that Ito may be an alternate version of Bear since it's not harming the player, and like Uzumaki, there was seemingly two worlds of Karuzo-cho, where one version was a complete spiral labyrinth, and the other is a version where Karuzo-cho is unaffected or under no influence of the spiral. Also stating that Ito is living in Anemoya because it was home to it. What I think the wiki makers meant is that Ito's bound to Anemoya, just like the people of Karuzo-cho when it was in a state of no return. Also, yet again, advising the player to keep moving before it ends up bound, or according to Bear Lore, the bear itself. Which bear may represent the spiral, funny enough. This isn't theoretical at all, because I did analyze this for 4 hours. But now let's break down the dialogue between the player and Ito. So the first few lines being exchanged isn't really significant too much until Ito's third line, where it states, quote unquote, a quiet, peaceful zone, home to some, which by definition means it's a place where very few people occupy it or bound to it, like people, the townspeople in Karuzo-cho, which was peaceful and home to some, as appears toward the end of the story. The next line, few lines don't mean much technically until the part where Ito states, that I didn't expect to find anyone here, at least not so soon. Which is clearly the center of the two worlds in Uzumaki, whereas one world must be normal Kuruzocho and the other is the twisted dimension, in which, in this case, not 100% sure, someone can fact check it, but like in Bear Alpha, Anemoia and Monochrome seems to have a relationship in Star but not in Alpha. So meaning that Anemoia may be the twisted or the normal Kuruzocho and vice versa with Monochrome. It could be interchangeable. In Uzumaki, the twisted spiral version of Kuruzocho is simply people who succumbed to the spiral or died, in which is similar to Monochrome where there's a graveyard and many ghosts that roamed around it and whatnot. Anemoia seems to be the normal side like the town in Uzumaki, one normal, one strange. Which brings us to Ito stating that I thought most would end up deceased before they come here, which means that Anemoia is either sort of like Zenith or near the end in Uzumaki where the protagonist and her boyfriend finds the labyrinth in a spiraling staircase. And finally, Ito states that this place is open now. It won't be safe for long. You and I need to keep moving. Shows that like Kuruzocho, the town, Anemoia is temporarily safe and must keep going to avoid supposedly Bear, or in this case, the spiral. Which is similar to the snail people as briefly mentioned earlier where going too slow causes you to become a human snail. Alright, well, that's the broken down analysis of Ito's origin and concept based off its core reference Uzumaki. If you enjoyed this video, buy the book. Barnes & Noble sell it for 50% off because it's hardcover. Let me know if you like this, if you would like a series of this kind of video similar to this. And yeah, give me a sub if you can. Unlike the book, it's free and it'll help me to reach 400. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. Ciao.